everybody, and welcome back to the next part of this keyboard shortcut tutorial. In this particular case, as you can see on the screen, we're going to be looking at function a little typo. I wrote keyboard function shortcuts. I can't believe. You know what? I'm going to leave it like that, just to torment you. Function shortcuts. Sorry, this sounds so wrong. Alright, so function shortcuts for you. Na zdrowie. Okay, so now we move forward. We move forward with this. Okay, so in the first one, we looked at all of our tool shortcuts. Sorry, I'm forgetting about the fact that okay. Yeah, blah. Okay, okay. All right. I'm good. I can handle this. Okay. So in this one, we're going to look at function shortcuts. Okay, stuff that we do when we're actually navigating, playing around with our document, working in it, painting, doing all this different kind of stuff. And I've broken it up into different categories. I'm sorry if it kind of goes here and there and everywhere a little bit, but I tried to keep myself as organized as possible. I might go off on little tangents. I'll try not to. But I do want to explain how these different things work so that you can implement them into your workflow to the best of your capacity. And remember, as I mentioned before, physically do it. When you actually physically sit down and do your next Photoshop painting or whatever the case might be, make an effort to use these shortcuts, because that way it quickly commits it to your memory, and that way you can abandon the guide. Okay, but I have this on screen if at any point you need to refer back to it or screen cap it or whatever the case might be. Okay, and if you aren't sure about a little trick that I showed for screen capturing your image in Photoshop and getting it to the right dimensions right away, check out the end of the first video. I show a little trick to that. Okay. So with this case, we're going to start with document management. So opening documents, playing around with documents, all that kind of stuff. So the first default thing is new document, right? So that is Control N, and that gives me the option of opening a new document. Now here in this particular case, I can set to, some common, let's say widescreen, so 1910 by 1080. I can set my resolution, let's say 300 or whatever the case might be. I can change the background color, the default background color, to whatever I want. That kind of idea. I can also save a preset in this particular case. At this point, if I put these in and I do save presets, it'll save this. I can have a custom one, okay, and I can save it as my own unique preset and name it whatever I want. So if it's a document size that I use very often, like for instance when I'm doing trading card games, I have a specific dimension that I use, bang, open it up one shot, I just set my preset and I'm good to go. And in newer versions of Photoshop CC 2015 and 16, on the main screen, when you close Photoshop, you have immediate access to your presets as well. So that's a very handy feature as well with the new splash page for the recent versions of Photoshop. So Control N as in Nancy for a new document. If you want to open an existing document, you actually have two different options. You can do Control O, which I personally never do, okay? Or you can double click on an inactive area. And what I mean by inactive is anything that's not, I'm not going to double click within my image, but all of this is inactive currently. So if I double click on that, that also gives me the option to open up a document as well. Now, if you're very keen and you were paying close attention, you'll notice I had a little Dark Souls 2 icon there on my screen. And while we're on the subject, F you Dark Souls. I started playing about a week ago and I'm like, it's a good game, but okay, I digress. I'm not saying anything, but that game is designed to piss you off. All right, next, or double click inactive screen, as I just mentioned before. Okay, close document, which is again something I never do. I would just click the X, but you can do Control W. And now, if you have a document that isn't yet saved, okay, it asks you to save. So in this particular case, I'm going to cancel it. Okay. You can do that, or if it's saved, you just hit Control W, and if you do Control Shift W or Control Alt W, it closes everything on your screen. So let's say if you have 30 images open, that's handy. So Control Alt W will allow you to close all of your current open documents. And like say, for instance, if you've ever seen the brush sauce theaters that I do with Tyler Edlin, the art competitions, so many people submit their artwork that I end up doing like this huge page of art. I have this huge splash page, and they're going close, 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 close. It gets on my nerve at a certain point, so I just do Control Alt W, and it closes everything automatically. Okay. Next is to save. Now the default to save is just Control S. If you want to save as, which I generally I'm more likely to do Control Shift S to save as, because I save in increments. If you ever seen my work documents, you'll notice that by the time I'm finished the painting, I have 30 versions of it. I just save in different steps all the time, unless of course I work in a certain method in my layers that where I keep earlier versions of that, where I can keep my file size number down. And the moment I have my final and it's approved and I'm happy with it, I delete earlier versions, unless I want to show like step-by-step processes, you know, like showing things for like showing the actual process of my paintings. But I always save in increments, so Control Shift S is generally what I do. Next is image size, which you can access if you wanted to. You can go now. You can't see my menu bar here because I'm not recording, but if I go into image, no, you can't see it on the screen. If I want to actually select my image size, you go into, I'll just say it, you go into image on your menu up at the top and you go image size, or you can do Alt Control I, and that allows me to change my image size. Now, I'm going to mention a second one before I move forward with this. There's image size and there's canvas size. They actually have two different functions. Image size actually changes the size of my image. So it's usually, it'll scale my image globally. So if I do my image size and I reduce this down to, let's say, 1000, notice that it's scaled because this is locked. Okay? So if I click OK, I've just reduced the size of my image down to this, but I don't want to do that. So I'm going to scale it back. I'm going to Control Alt Z it. I'm going to undo. Okay? But if I, let's say, unlock it and I do 1000, watch what's going to happen. It's scaling and squishing my image. It's kind of like looking at the original version of VHS Indiana Jones on a widescreen TV. All of a sudden everything goes, or, you know, everything gets squished, right? Because it's not actually cropping my image. It's just adjusting the actual overall screen dimensions. Now that's the difference between image size and canvas size. If I go into canvas size, I can do Control Alt C, okay? With canvas size functions as a cropping tool, but I have specific options on how I can do it. Now, this is the only time I'll ever use canvas size if I have to reduce or crop the size of my image specifically to a specific dimension, but I never actually use this function, but I'll explain to you how it works anyways. I can choose pixels, inches, centimeters, any different measurement method that I want, okay? And in this particular case, let's say I set it to pixels, so it's 2922 by 1705. If I reduce this down to 1500, watch what happens to my image. I've just cut out the width of my image on both sides. Why on both sides? Well, because if you look here at the bottom, the anchor point, the anchor is set to the center. So any crop, any image size reduction or increase that I do to my image is going to function towards the center, in or out. And that's why it cut both sides, because it's shrinking dimensionally this way. However, what if I do this instead and I click it to the left? Oops, I actually didn't crop anything. Let me set it to pixels. I usually prefer working in pixels. I'm going to click over here on the left thing. And what this is going to do, check it out. It only cut off the other side. The anchor point is here and it's reduced inwards towards there. Okay? I can do the same thing if I want to just remove the bottom. So set to pixels as well. And I'll set this to 1000, let's say. Notice it just cut the bottom off. It anchors to that particular point, and I'm reducing from that size. Again, I use the crop tool for this kind of stuff, generally speaking. I don't usually use that. And I'm usually, if I'm doing anything within certain specific constraints, certain specific dimensions, the dimension is prepared before I start the image and not after. I don't do an image and then crop it after. That's not generally how I work. So, just saying. But you might, and that's what that's about. So it's Control Alt I or Control Alt C, or you can just go into image canvas size or image image size. The next is our hand tool, which I actually showed in part 1, but essentially the hand tool is for navigating around my screen. So if I'm in full screen mode, if I hit F, I'm in full screen mode, by holding down the space bar, I automatically toggle into my hand move tool, which allows me to move around my screen like this. Okay. Again, I mentioned this in part 1, but I'll just repeat it for the sake of this because it does fall into this particular part of the tutorial. So we've got that and hand tool. Now zoom in. Okay. I also mentioned this in part 1, but I'll repeat it quickly. If you're working in later versions of Photoshop that have OpenGL enabled, okay, then if you hold Control and Spacebar, you can zoom in and out smoothly. Otherwise, you have to do Alt and Spacebar, or sorry, Control and Spacebar and click in a specific area to zoom in like that, or Control Alt and Spacebar to zoom out like that. You can't, and if you actually want to zoom quickly into a specific spot, you would hold down Control and Spacebar and you would make a selection around, let's say this N over here, I'd make a selection around it and it would immediately pop me right into it would full screen that N. So I could work on that N specifically, or whatever other area I'm working in. Next is hand tool, zoom in, zoom out, Control Spacebar, free zoom, Control Spacebar and drag. That's exactly how I was just mentioning it here. Okay. Ah, yes, a very handy tool here. Something that I get a ton of use out of. All the time. When I'm resizing and I'm setting up my images, I'm moving around. I even set my Express remote to have this keyboard shortcut on it for my Cintiq. Is to zoom your image in and out, but scale the window relative to it so that your window is always hugging your image perfectly. And the keyboard shortcut for that is Control and Alt. You hold down Control and Alt, and then you either tap the minus or the plus key, which are right at the top, just to the right of your number keys, just to the right of your 0, or just to the left of your backspace, depending on the kind of keyboard you're working on. So you've got your plus and minus there. So I've got Control Alt, and then I do the minus key or the plus key. And this is very handy when I want to quickly scale my images around and set them up. And I want to open another one and scale it and move it. This is what I do with my image references all the time. Okay? Now, like that. While we're on the subject, I don't know if I mentioned this somewhere down, something I'd like to mention as well, while we're on the subject, let me actually add it to our document so we have this handy. Okay, let me throw this in here, is zoom scale window, here, let me go here. I'm going to zoom image full size pixels. And that is Control plus Alt plus 0, as in 0, like that. Okay. Very often, let's say I'm zoomed into an awkward. Notice when I'm zoomed out about this far. Notice how my text looks a little bit pixelated. It looks a little bit weird, and I actually want to see what my image is going to look like at full screen size dimensions, is in pixels. Not to be confused with print size, by the way, because you can have a huge pixel size, but then the actual document size for printing is this small. You can get caught that way. So if you have to print something at a certain dimension, make sure you set your print dimensions accurately. But I want to see how big this is going to look on screen, because I know this is only going to be for my online website. It's only all I'm interested in. So I want to make sure it's a big enough image. Control Alt and 0 all together simultaneously will give me full size pixel dimensions. And this is something I do very frequently. Notice now that my text is very sharp because it's the actual pixels. Anytime I'm within an awkward pixel ratio, because I'm doing a smooth OpenGL scroll in and out, right? There might be certain awkward moments, awkward zoom levels where it might do that. It might pixelate it a little bit and make it look a bit anti-aliased and stuff. Okay? And I'll explain anti-aliasing in another video. So that's that, and then rotate canvas. The last one is rotate, which again, I mentioned this in another video. You just hit the R key and you can click and drag like that, which is very, very handy for artists when you want to, for instance, do a drawing. Say, let's grab my lady over here. Okay, I'm going to do Control Alt 0 to get the full size of the image. Now when I'm painting, I want my hand moves intuitively in a certain direction. So let's say when I'm drawing, moving in this direction or going down, or maybe even going across, that's okay, but maybe coming down this way is very awkward because I'm going against my arm in a certain strange way. So I have a lot more control going in this direction. I'm okay going in this direction. But when I come down towards my arm, oh, it can get a little bit weird. It's hard. I'm having a hard time controlling it. So you just hit R, you rotate your canvas, and now I can constantly work in a direction where my hand works comfortably. Okay? My hand moves more comfortably in this particular direction. Now, when I want to go back to my default state, hit escape. And as I mentioned in the earlier video as well, when I'm in the rotate tool, if I hold down shift, it's going to only rotate at 15-degree increments. So I can go at a perfect 90-degree rotation, can't I? This makes it very handy for me if I just want to rotate it sideways and get more of a portrait or landscape view. And escape to go back to my default view. And delete. When I want to delete, I just hit the little trash can over here. So I can hit F 2 times to go back into my windowed mode, and I'm going to do Control Alt and minus to scale this one down, and I can move it here. And this one, I'm going to scale to this size here. And I did Control Alt minus to bring it to this size. Again, some of these keyboard shortcuts I already mentioned in part 1. If you haven't seen it, go and check it out. Okay. Next is transforming. Now we're actually starting to deal with actual graphics. Okay. So in this particular case, we're going to look at transforming tools, different ways of different functions for transforming. So let me make sure I've got, okay. So I'm going to use my marquee tool. So I'm going to hit marquee, but I want the elliptical marquee tool. So I'm going to do Shift M, and I want to create a circle from the center out. I don't want to do it across from the corner. I want to actually create the circle from the center outwards. Again, all stuff I mentioned in part 1, like that. And then I'm going to fill it with my background purple color. So I'm going to do Control and backspace. All right. Now, if I want to transform, the keyboard shortcut for transforming is Control T. T as in transformer, T as in Tommy. All right. And it creates a transformation box. Now I have different options. I can scale it from the corner outwards. It warps it slightly, right? But I can scale from the corner outwards, Control Z. I can scale just the length of it. I can stretch it into an oval just by clicking the middle one and dragging down. Or sideways. I can click either one of these and click it sideways. But what if I want to scale it uniform? I want it to stay a perfect circle. I don't want to make it an oval. Well, there's several different options I can do with this. Okay, I can hold down Shift, and this is something again that I mentioned as well with marquee selections and all this kind of stuff as well. If I hold down Shift and click a corner, I can scale it out where this anchor point stays in the spot. Or I can scale it from the center point. You can see the center point vaguely right here. If I hold down Shift and Alt simultaneously and I click a corner, it actually scales out based relative to this anchor point in the middle. Now an anchor point in Photoshop, and if you're working in 3D, it works the same thing. Anchor points have the same function. They're any transformation, be it scaling, rotating, zooming, whatever the case might be, from a specific spot, right? So if I can physically take, just by mousing over, you see how my cursor turns into a little arrows? And I click and I can drag it out here, all the way to here. Let's say I'll move it up into the corner. Now if I do Control and Alt and I scale it, it's going to scale it relative to that new anchor point. However, that doesn't apply if I'm just holding down Shift, because Shift only does it relative to this corner point. But if I do Control and Alt, it'll scale it in towards there, which is great if I want to do something like this. If I wanted to, let's say, have something in perspective. And I can move it down here and I can zoom it out like that. Okay. This kind of idea. And I would make sure to have a little bit of a reference point. So every time I move my anchor point, I move it to that little spot. So it's in the same spot, so I can have all my pillars go off in the same direction. Not something I do very frequently, but it is an option. That's how you would be able to use something like that. Okay. So that's to move it. Now, in terms of the actual transforming and warping of this physical image itself, there are many other different keyboard shortcuts. And the 3 default ones is you have Control, which allows you to transform from a specific vertice, or a specific, vertice, which would be any of the side or the corner pieces. So if I hold Control, you see my cursor turns white. Now it's isolating this specific corner. Now I can just skew it out from that corner out, and I can skew it out from here, and I can skew it out from here. Okay? And then when I'm happy with it, I hit Enter to confirm that selection. But I decided not, screw it. I'm going to go back. So I do Control Z. Now I'm going to do Control T again. Now I want to skew from the 2 opposite corners. So I want it to do opposing transformations. So if I do Alt and Control simultaneously, notice that it's doing the opposite corner, which can come in handy if you want to do some kind of something that I would never do because I never use that function at all when I'm transforming. Or the last is Control Alt Shift and click and drag, which I do sometimes use when I want to put things quickly into perspective. So if I do Control Alt and Shift, again, you have to translate that into a Mac keyboard if you're working on a PC on a Mac. Okay, Control Alt and Shift simultaneously, it gives me a perspective skew. Okay, now I want to scale it down, so I want to make it look more like, I'm going to move this down, and I want to skew it slightly just to the side to make it look a little bit off to the side. So I'm going to hold Control, and I'm going to skew it off to the side like that, and maybe move this. I want to move this corner, just this corner, but I want to move it straight. I don't want to accidentally do this to it. I want it to go straight in this direction. So what I do is I do Control, so I'm moving this vertex, but then I hold Shift because Shift allows me, it's a universal key in Photoshop for doing straight lines or doing things on a straight vertical or horizontal axis. So like that. And then I can do it straight up on a straight axis as well. Okay, there you go. Now I hit Enter, and now I've got a nice oval in perspective, which is how you would do it essentially in Photoshop. When you're doing it traditionally, it's a big pain in the ass, right? If you've ever taken perspective class, you know what I'm talking about. In Photoshop, this is how you can get things done very quickly. And that's it for transforming. So the next is just a little quick mention for filters. But there's very little to say about that. Let's say, for instance, I decide I've got my image here. Okay, oops, daisy. Let me just move it up here. Okay, oops. There we go. Okay, let's say I have my image up here. There. Okay, so this is up on the top, and I want to apply a filter. Normally, what I would do is I go into Filter. You might not be able to see this. Filter, and then Blur, and then I'm going to choose Gaussian Blur, which is just off screen. You're not quite seeing it. Okay, so Gaussian Blur. So I've just blurred the whole thing. Okay. If once you have confirmed and you've hit OK on a filter, it remembers that last filter that you did. What to what degree, to what measurement you actually did that last filter. So let's say I decide I want to create another image, and let's say I have my marquee tool over here, and I want to apply that exact same filter to this oval as well, which is something you're going to do very frequently. You're going to repeat the same filters on multiple different objects. You do Control Alt F, okay? And it just applied that exact same filter, Gaussian blur, onto this, but I had to do it once manually first. That's what little thing I wanted to mention. But it opens up the dialog box, so if I want, I can increase or decrease that blur to my own personal taste. All right? So remember, Control Alt F repeats that last one that I did. All right? So let's delete this because we don't need this. Or I could do something cool. I can just set it to lighten, and it gives me a nice glow. That's a little trick for getting a glow effect. Just Gaussian blur and set it to lighten. Don't tell anybody. It's a secret. It's my little secret formula for you. Na zdrowie. All right. So that's filtering. Next is duplicating. This is something you're going to get a ton of use out of as well. Something I use on a daily basis all the time, and can be a very time-consuming thing if you don't know the keyboard shortcuts for this kind of stuff. So this is where you're going to buy me a beer, right? Now, a lot of these functions, I just put a little bit of a mention here at the top. Here, I'll scroll in a little bit so you can see it. Let me zoom in a little bit. Okay, so you can see it. While in the Move tool, you have to have the Move tool active. So hit your V key, V as in Victor, to be in your Move tool, because sometimes some of these functions only work if you're in Move. Some of them only work, for instance, if you're in Brush tool. Certain are dependent on the tool that you're in. So in this particular case, let me create a new image. So let's say marquee, and I'm going to create a circle, and this one I'm going to make green. Okay, and I hit V to move it over. Now I want to duplicate this. Now, what would you normally do? Well, one of the old school ways of doing it would be into my marquee tool, and I make a selection, and then I go Control C, Control V, the universal, universal language keyboard shortcut through cross-platform, cross-application to copy-paste, right? However, that can be a very time-consuming endeavor, right? If I'm constantly doing Control C, Control V, I can go Control V, 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 and I can copy, 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 but it's the pasting in different ways, and then maybe I have to do a selection around it. If I just want to do a quick selection around it first, and then Control C, V, 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 it keeps moving it to a different spot. The keyboard shortcut for duplicating something on screen quickly, and something you'll get, like I said, a ton of use if you want to do lamp posts, if you want to do whatever the case might be, is just to hold down Alt while you're in the Move tool and just click and drag. And it automatically makes it a copy. You can see it copies it onto a new layer every time. Now there's something important to mention about this, okay? It copies it onto a new layer because it's not selected. So once because it's not selected, every time I copy, it creates a new layer, new layer, new layer. If I don't want that to happen, then what I have to do is select it first, and I'm gonna kind of skip ahead a little bit, but it's something I'm gonna have to mention first. If I go over the layer and I click on Control and click, just like I did with my paths tool in part 1, okay? Same thing applies to the layers tool. If I hold down Control and click on the window, it selects this. Now if I copy, I can make multiple copies, and because it's selected, notice that it made all of those copies on the same layer. It's a very handy tool, okay? So if you don't want to create multiple copies, that's the way to go about it, okay? So that's for duplicating, and you Control C, Control V. Oh yes, the next is, let's say on this new layer, I do this, okay? Now I want to copy, let's say I like the whole image. Let's say I did a painting. Let's go back to this one over here, okay? Let's go back to our widow over here. And if you look at the original image has many, many, many different layers, the whole construction of this image. So if let's say I have, like, if I'm just on a certain layer, actually I don't want to do that, but if I'm on a certain layer, say I have, let's create a new layer here, and I fill it with green, okay? Let's say I painted a new part of the image, and I like this, but now I want to flatten everything onto a single layer without deleting or flattening or flattening any of the layers in the back, because I may need to refer back to that after. I don't want to collapse all those layers. If I just do a selection like this around here, and I do a Control C, Control V, I'm only copying what's on that layer. But what if I want to copy something that's on all layers, just basically making a copy of everything on my image or everything within a selection? Then I need to use another shortcut, and that is called copy merged. Copy merged copies everything from every layer, visible layer essentially. So here. So if I do this, so now I'm going to create my thing here. Let's say I've censored out her elbow because it's a very naughty elbow, right? Now if I do Control A, let's say, okay, I say Control Alt. Control A is to select all, and I do Control Shift C, Control Shift V. I copy, paste, merge. Now everything is on one layer. It's all been duplicated onto the single layer. Okay, so very handy. Now same thing applies here. If I was in the actual document here and I made a selection, it would only select maybe her, or it would maybe only select her hair because all of those were on separate layers. But I want to copy, paste, merged it. I just make a selection. Now if I do Control Shift C, Control Shift V, now I've copied everything and I've made a full duplicate of that area that's selected. And the same thing can apply if I'm using the lasso tool. Copy, paste, merged, like that. Okay, so it's a copy, paste, merged again. This is something you get a ton of use of. A little quick trick, something I do with my students very often is we analyze our paintings in black and white in value. We remove all of the color information. Now there's different ways that people do it, but my personal way of doing it is I just anchor my pinky and my ring finger on the Control and Shift, and then I do C, V, and then U. All right? Now here, let me backtrack so you can see what that does. First I'm going to do Control A to select all. I'm going to do Control Shift C, but then I'm going to keep my fingers on Control and Shift. Then I'm going to do Control Shift V, which is paste merged, and then while my fingers are still there, I do Control Shift U. And Control Shift U removes saturation information. It's the quick shortcut for removing saturation. So Control Shift C, V, U, and then I can go quickly and check if my values look okay. Good, I'm good to go. Okay, and I do that to do quick tests to see how my values hold up at that particular point in time. Okay, So that's how to do copy, paste, merged. Let's get rid of this bad boy over here. Okay. So duplicating, copy, paste, blah, 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 content aware scale. Oh yeah, this is something else. Now this might not quite work, with what we've got here, but content aware is a new feature that came out in Photoshop CC, which tries its best to recognize what's happening in that image and allowing you to scale things so that it stays relative to the current area. Now this is, take my word for it, it's not going to work properly, but I just want to show you this keyboard shortcut because it might apply in your case. So let's say I do a copy paste merged of Control Shift C, Control Shift V. So now we've isolated this onto this layer. Now I do content aware scale, Control Alt Shift C. So I'm hitting all those modifiers, Control Alt Shift and C. Now when I scale, it's trying to warp itself based on the local area. Okay, see how it's trying its best to kind of hug her face? It's trying, but in this particular case, it's not the ideal situation for it. In other different situations, it might work fine. Let's say if I have a tree on a landscape and I want to scale the tree down and keep that grass behind it in the sky, it might do that. It is a powerful tool, but it's not for everything. But just be aware of that. It's a clever little tool. It's trying sort of, maybe if I do a little bit, it's kind of trying to hug these areas. It's a very powerful tool. Like I said, it's situational. But that's content aware scale, Control Alt Shift C. All right. Next is selecting. Okay. Now, is this something I already mentioned in part one? Control. Okay. Well, let's go through it. Okay. All right. So marquee or lasso, as I mentioned in part one, and I repeated over here, L for lasso or M for marquee. Delete selection. Oh yes. So let's say I'm in my lasso tool, L, and in this particular case, I just want to do a regular free draw lasso tool, or I'll do free draw lasso tool and then I'll convert that to polygon by holding down my Alt key, and then I've made my selection. Okay, I've made my selection here. Now I want to add to that selection because I wanted to select in little parts at a time. I didn't want to select everything simultaneously. I didn't have enough confidence that I could select everything in one shot because it's a very intricate little thing I'm selecting. Well, I can hold down Shift, and if you look at my cursor, my Shift has a little plus sign next to it, and that means that I can add to my selection. So I just gave this abstract shape of mine a really, really infected zit, and another zit on the zit, and a zit on the zit, and a zit on the zit, and a zit on the zit. Okay. All right, I'm adding to my selection. If I hold down Alt, you see it turns into a minus, and now I can delete, I can cut out of my selection. All right, now there's another one that you can do that, there's another selection thing that you can do that I never use personally, but it's for what it's worth checking out. If you want to remove everything but a certain part of a selection. So let's say I just want to keep this form over here, but I want to delete everything else. I do Control and Alt. Oops. Control Alt. Oh, sorry. No, not Control and Alt. Shift and Alt. Okay. And you notice how it's got a little X. Now, if I make a selection around just the tip here, and I let go, only this is preserved. Everything else is deleted, or at least as far as the selection is concerned. Okay. Now the next thing is actually making selections on screen of objects that we've got physically selected. This is something you can get a ton of use out of. This is another one that gets you a beer if you teach somebody this for the first time. Let's say, for the sake of argument, I've got several different objects. Okay, so I've got a green thing here, and on another layer I've got, and this is sensitive to the pixel, by the way. So it doesn't. I'm just showing this to you in very simplified form, in very large formats, but I could select very specific things here, and then we're gonna have, oops. Like that, and then over here we're going to up. Okay, like that. So I've got these objects here, and I've got this object here, and I've got one that overlaps back here. I'll move this over here, and this is going to be yellow, like that. Okay, something like this. Okay, so something like this. Now, if I'm working in many, many different layers, which it can happen. I know, like, for instance, when I was working on the Disney show, when we get when we get backgrounds from Disney, there was 7,000 layers. Like, holy smokes, these files were humongous. And we had to be able to navigate this very quickly and organize it very quickly. And of course, the guys at Disney assume you know what you're doing, right? So this is the type of thing that we had to deal with on a daily basis. And this is something that when you're working on a piece of artwork, you don't want to have to come into each layer and go, oh, okay, so this is on this layer and this is on this there. You don't want to work like that. That's how you used to work, and is very, very slow. It really is time consuming. So there's a keyboard shortcut for that, one which you will love. And that is to hold down the control key while you're in the move tool. You have to click V for the move tool, and you can hold down control and physically click on that object. And you notice these two are on the same layer, so it's not changing layer, but watch what's happening with my layers. When I click on the yellow, green, okay? Notice how it automatically pops me to that layer that has that object selected. I can do this with multiple ones too. I can hold down Control and Shift simultaneously, and I can go here, I can select this one, then I can select all of them. Now I've got all of them selected, and I can move them together. And if I want to deselect these layers, I have to click on one of the layers. I have to click off of it, and now I can manually toggle between each one depending on which one I'm clicking on. Okay. Now there's something important to mention about this selection, and that is the fact that when they're grouped, you're not going to be able to do that, because when it's grouped, it's just going to select the group. The topmost node of this particular section is the group itself. So in order for you to be able to do this, it has to be ungrouped. Okay. And again, don't worry, I'm going to show you all the keyboard shortcuts for layers as well. That's in the next section. Okay. So if you want to make a selection around different things, make sure they're not grouped. If they're grouped, you're only going to be able to select the group, and that's very counterproductive. Okay. But I'm going to show you a cool trick to make that whole process a lot easier, especially when you're dealing with very, very complex files. So let's delete all this stuff and look at the next one. It's got the selections. Okay. Now the last section of this is color adjustments. So let's say, for the sake of argument, here, let's go back to our widow over here. Okay. And we'll full screen mode it. So I hit F for full screen. I can get rid of my paths. I don't really need that right now. Now I want to make certain adjustments to this image, okay? But I want to do it quickly and intuitively. Maybe I want to adjust the contrast. Maybe I want to adjust the hue or the saturation or whatever. And I don't want to go into menus all the time. Now I can, if I want to. I can go into Image, Mode, or Image Adjustments. Here, make sure I'm on the right layer. Oh, this is a group, so it's not showing up. If you go into your menu, by the way, and you notice that certain things are grayed out, it's because you can't access it. Look over at your layers, and you might very well not be able to access that particular function because it's in a group. So what I would do is do a copy paste merged. Now it's on a layer. Now I can come in here and I have access to this. So image, you can't see it right now on screen, and I go into image, adjustments, and I have vibrance, hue, saturation, color balance, black and white, photo filter, so on and so forth. There's only a few that I actually use, all right? At least for a digital painter, but you have access to all of them in that image, adjustments, and that menu that follows. So you can go and experiment with that yourself. But in this particular case, I want to just change the hue and the saturation. Hue meaning color, right? And that's Control U. Now I can adjust the hue, and I can just globally change the color, or I can do it to a specific area. I can hit L for lasso, and I just want to change this color of her face. I hit Control U, and now I'm just changing the color of her face here. Look at that. Instant undead zombie. That's how you do it, by the way. And this you ship to the client. This is considered a final. No, it's not. Don't quote me on that. My old colleague used to, you do like a little selection tool, and you go, it's perfect, ship it. That was his joke. Sorry about the plane passing overhead. So that's for changing the hue, but I can also do other things. I can change the saturation. I can change the value, lightness or darkness. Okay, but these are global things. This doesn't just affect specific attributes of my values. This is just value in general. Brighter, darker, more saturated, less saturated. This color, that color. It's very, very basic change. It's common enough that you'll use it, but but it's not a very precise adjustment. So what we want to do instead, maybe I want to instead play with the values, but only certain facets of the value. So in that case, I might want to use levels. And a levels adjustment is Control L. L as in levels. Larry, lollipop, lullaby, Larry, larynx, loser, lost everything. we'll never get it back. Licking something. Nah, okay. I'm not nearly that creative. All right, so in levels, I have the option to do a lot of different things. I have very specific control over my low, medium, and high values. The top section either increases the darks, increases the lights, or increases or decreases my midtones, my grays. So I can increase dark, I can increase the lights, or I can increase or decrease the grays. Okay? But I'm going to undo this. On the bottom, it's to remove in case I need to, because I don't need to do it with the grays, because the grays I have that option already on the top, but with the top I can remove black or I can remove whites. Okay, so this gives me a lot more control. And remember, the keyboard shortcut is Control L. Now, while we're in this, I can also control certain channels of color. So my reds, remember this is an RGB. If I was in CMYK, which means cyan, magenta, yellow, key meaning black, right, for printing. But if I'm in my RGB mode, then I can click on red, for instance, and if I click this, I actually start to remove reds. Or if I can click on green, I can remove green, which makes it more magenta, right? That kind of idea. Blue, I remove blue, making my image appear more orange, all right? But I don't want to do that. So that's my levels adjustment. Another one that I do very commonly is my curves. Curves is kind of a very quick contrast selection thing. You can also use it for colors as well. And curves is Control M. Now, if you're recording in Camtasia, like I'm doing right now, okay, and you try to use Control M, it won't work. For some reason, Control M must be some function in Camtasia. I don't usually use keyboard shortcuts for Camtasia. I just use buttons because they got big fat buttons. Click here. But in the case where you've got Camtasia running, your Control M will not work. M is in Michael. But in this case, see, it's not doing anything. So what I have to do instead is go Edit, or Image, Adjustments, and where are you at? Curves. Curves is right up here at the top. You can't see it. Okay, there's my curves adjustment. Now here, by pulling it up, I'm increasing the value and decreasing the value. But notice it's not like my hue saturation slider. It actually respects contrast. It's actually kind of like boosting or lowering the contrast of an image. But you also have the option here of playing with different channels. So I can go into red, for instance, like a very common technique used for people doing film editing, where they want to add that typical, orange and teal, or lights are orange, shadows are teal. Look for that in any movie. Look at The Matrix, look at Batman, look at any film. It's always orange, teal, orange, teal, orange, teal, okay? This is one of the ways that they do it. So what they would do for an orange is they would come in here and they would increase the reds, like that, and green and blue. Increase the green. Oh, but first you would want to select a certain value first. So let me see here. So let me say I want to work within these high values. So I'm going to do Control M, or in this case, Image Adjustments, Curves, and I want to work within the high values only. So I click on this, and I click on my high value. Now my image has kind of readjusted itself to that high value. So I don't know if that's what I want to be here. No, definitely not. I have to find that brightest area in my painting. Let's cancel this. So Control M. This is annoying when I'm recording. Curves. And I'll do it. It's gonna overexpose my image slightly, but bear with me. So I clicked on that. Now I can go directly into my, let's say, my red, and I can increase the reds in my high values because I'm working strictly within the reds. Like that. Like, and I go into my greens and I can increase my greens. Oh, no, but I don't want to increase the greens globally. I don't want to increase the green. I want to increase them only in my dark values. There we go. So I'll get my green, and then I increase a little bit of green in my darks. Oops, maybe here. There. And my blues. There. So now I'm getting my teal and orange thing going on. And this is kind of the movie effect that you end up getting. That's one way that people do it. Another way that people do it is sometimes just using color balance layers and stuff like that and selecting high or low value. To each their own, but this is generally the more common way of going about it. That's one of the tangents I was talking about. So That's for curves. So hue, saturation, Control U, levels, Control L, and curves, Control M if you're not recording in Camtasia. And that, I believe, covers all of the major function keyboard shortcuts. Of course, there might be a few, or not keyboard shortcuts, function shortcuts. Sounds like something my 3-year-old boy would say. Shortcuts, you know, something that's very cute. So yes, so hopefully you enjoyed. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, or otherwise give it a huge stinking sweltering thumbs down and just attach a flaming hate letter to that. No, please don't do that. I'm an oversensitive man. Don't do that. And remember, of course, if you're interested in private mentorship, get in touch with me, and you can go check out all of the information in the description below. All right. So thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next part.